pretty messy essay.
Like structure
Like I
wise.
crossed a lot out and between my words, and not a lot.
You like overspace or not?
No space.
Have you started grading them yet?
Oh yeah, I got most of them done.
Who are you waiting
The ones I didn't finish yet. There he is.
That is a good neck beard.
That is a beautiful neck beard.
I would say beautiful. I'd say like
Oh, I didn't even notice it.
That's
so nasty.
Merlot pad.
At lunch, I think Kiara can start working on her Thoreau portrait.
I like the rope.
Wouldn't that be uncomfortable?
I think Kate should grow one.
Kate
Huh?
could.
Oh,
Kate could.
Kate girl real
He grows with me. I thought.
Just holding up here, he's just staring at this picture and critiquing this man.
I don't think there's anything else you can know about civil disobedience.
That's actually what art history is. It's just looking at a picture for 40 minutes. Critiquing it.
That's actually really true. I've almost fell asleep.
All right, so what would you say about Henry David Thoreau?
He looks like a guy who'd be upset with some aspect of government.
He kind of looks like he liked it.
I was gonna say that. I don't know if it's the hair or more the beard.
I think it's the neck
Is
beard.
he?
Does he
really
have
super controversial things. Like, I'm shocked he was alive. Like, he has blue eyes.
1849.
Is
That
it
would have
really?
been.
How do you know that?
Because look how light they are.
It could be light brown.
Why is his head hair silky but his neck beard just like
So.
gross? Like he needs to like condition it.
In all honesty, I wouldn't say his hair's silky. It's probably oily at the top.
Yeah.
Because you have that. You're not going to have. Not being critical of him, but you're not going to have showers and that kind of. Well, not showers, but baths quite as often as.
If he had money to put on that nice suit for the picture,
Everybody
he
had
should
nice
take a
suits.
shower.
Actually, he had money because he didn't pay his taxes, which is where all this ends up kind of going from. All right, so a couple things with him would be you can see timeline of events, and you know that this is written in 1849. He passes away at a fairly young age in 1860s, which we'll get to, but he's born in 1817. He's in Concord, Massachusetts. His birth name is actually David Henry Thoreau, and there's even like a little bit of controversy as to how you say his name. Thoreau is the accepted pronunciation of it. I think it's his aunt has like in a family album kind of thing where the pronunciation would be closer to saying thorough. It's like you're doing a thorough reading of Thoreau's writing assignment of his essay, but it's kind of been changed a little bit over time to where he's considered to be Thoreau. He's named after his uncle. Uncle on his father's side passes away shortly before his birth. Bless you. And his name was David Henry, so they named him after the uncle who passed away. So they never lived at the same time. At some point, well, not exact year, but at some point after college, he starts just going by Henry David Thoreau. So he switches from David Henry to Henry David, and now it's just HDT. Would be the way that we would be looking at him. And change happens in college. We didn't read Nathaniel Hawthorne, Scarlet Letter. If you had taken the American history of Bruce Springsteen with Mrs. Burns, you would have read Scarlet Letter over the summer along with The Crucible. We used to read Scarlet Letter, but I got tired of it. But Nathaniel Hawthorne is the author of the Scarlet Letter, and him and Thoreau were, I wouldn't call them good friends, but certainly acquaintances. And he describes Thoreau as ugly as sin. So when I think back, did you have Ben Swayze in class? Yes, I did. Describe Ben. Ben is as ugly as sin, long-nosed, queer-mouthed, and with uncouth and rustic, though courteous manners, corresponding well with such an exterior, but his ugliness is of an honest and agreeable fashion. You wear it well.
I will. That's a good compliment.
It is, and it becomes so much better than beauty. So, according to Hawthorne, this is the look that you would expect of Thoreau after meeting him, not where, oh, that's what he looks like, but yeah, that's what he looks like. Whereas if he were a little more refined, a little bit more put together, if the beard wasn't, what was the word that you were using, Maria, like mangly?
Yeah.
If it was less mangly, you know what, it just wouldn't quite work for him quite as much.
Was he married?
zoom in.
That's,
No.
I see a dead
oh,
pet.
no wonder.
Oh, like the
Okay.
lice that was in there because it's like 1800s.
It's like a one
Is that-
step
that's-
Every other slide, Anna, I just keep coming back to him.
That's a weird compliment. Like he's
I
like,
don't know why it
but he
grosses
suits
me
his
out
own
so
people.
much, but it like really does.
I actually saw this guy in my dream.
Can you start your other periods like this? Just like very zoomed in pictures of this.
Good. All right. So a couple things with Henry David Thoreau. 1833 to 1837, he is studying at Harvard. He, from the last slide, what year was he born?
1807.
So when he goes in 1833, he would be
19. Oh wait, did we say 1817?
I don't know what year it was born.
Maybe 16.
so he would be 16 years
Oh,
old.
okay.
Some of us are going, wow, that's pretty young. Keep in mind, you don't have in the early 19th centuries when you do start having like public education taking shape, so it looks like more modern education system, kind of like how we have today. But it's not really a K through 12 system. So by the time you're 15, 16, 17 years old, if you plan on going to college, you're probably going to be going in at that point. It's not something that you wait until you're 18 years old, 19 years old, 20 years old. If you're heading off to college, chances are you're probably going to go into ministry, you're going to go into education, you're going to go in the medical field, or you're going to be a lawyer. His plan is to go into education. Some folks would be a little surprised that he would be going off to college because his family already has a successful business. They are one of the top New England manufacturers of
Fish oil.
Something really lame.
So, no.
Oh, wash pants.
just about all of you have one.
Shoes.
Belts.
Shoelaces.
Underwear. Microwaves.
Beds.
Microwaves.
Microwaves.
They were pioneering people.
That's true.
Backpacks.
I bet you could still find a John Thoreau and Company pencil somewhere on eBay if you want. They're pencil makers.
Oh.
Is that the Ticonderoga?
No, they were the company is no longer around. It ran from shortly after his birth, so like 1820. It had about a 30-year run, like 1820s, like 1850s. But yeah, they made pencils, and they were. And can't say like what kind of contracts they had or anything like that, you know, with Harvard or Yale or things like that. But Thoreau pencils were kind of like the Ticonderoga or you know whatever other pencil companies we can think of off the top of our head. Thoreau, like Henry David, is actually credited with coming with a better bonding agent for the graphite to the wood because you know you have the way they would make the pencils is you have a groove of the wood. It'd be two pieces then put together that would be basically glued together with the graphite, but the graphite would kind of still slide around within the groove of the pencil. So he would use clay as a binding agent. So you would take the strip of graphite, wrap it up in clay, put it in, encase it in wood, and that was a better binding agent so far as keeping the graphite. Otherwise, they were like mechanical pencils where it would just keep sliding in and out and all that kind of stuff. So he could have had a long, successful career as a pencil maker, but he decided to
We could all be using that.
look at something else. Pardon?
We could all be using Thoreau.
Could be using Thoreau pencils, but
Yeah.
we're not. So yeah, J. Thoreau and Company was big time pencils for the the 1830s and whatnot. But he goes to Harvard. When he's at Harvard, he becomes friends, pretty close friends, with a guy named Ralph Waldo Emerson. Emerson, and Thoreau is certainly well known in today's world, but Emerson would have been one of the preeminent writer, thinker kind of philosophers of the day in the 1830s, 1840s. New England, and you kind of think about how the United States would be set up at this point. You do it is a large nation so far as geography. Louisiana Purchase was like 1803, so there's a significant amount of land, but most of your people are still East Coast, and most of the colleges, the universities, the intellectual conversations, communities, and all that kind of stuff for New England. So New England's a hotbed for progressive thoughts and things of that nature. And Emerson's one of those leading folks with it. So he befriends Emerson in college. Emerson is someone who we'll get into a little bit later, but gives him a lot of connections and a lot of feedback with thinking. Not so much writing, but more of just ways of kind of looking at the world and things of that nature. After he graduates school, him and his brother John open up a grammar school in Concord, Massachusetts. But a few years later, his brother John dies of tetanus, and Thoreau's not going to be running the school all by himself, so the school kind of comes to an end at that point. So it's back to the pencil factory. They kind of do a little bit of work, but then at that point is when he goes back to Emerson and he ends up becoming a tutor for Emerson's children. So Ralph Waldo Emerson has a pretty significant estate. Thoreau goes to live with him on the property, and he basically stays there for a couple of years, tutoring the kids, getting them ready as they're going to progress throughout school. It's on Emerson's property where he decides to move to a place called Walden Pond from 1845 to 1847. So what he does from 1845 to 1847, he's still tutoring Emerson's family, but he's no longer living in the house anymore. He is now basically camping outside for, it ends up being about 2 years, all of 1846, half of 45, half of 47, so about a 24-month period. So essentially, he moves to Walden Pond. He is disconnected from, the world, so to speak. Not that we have cell phones with suspenders that we would be using, but he is trying to get away from political influence, religious influence, some social influences, so he can kind of find himself in the wilderness, so to speak. Thoreau would be considered, and taking an 8 push this year. Where are you guys?
We just finished up with Washington.
Okay, so we have a ways to go. You guys will probably spend some time going over transcendentalism when you get into like 1840s, 1850s, and Thoreau would be one of those folks who would be kind of a leading thinker within the transcendentalist idea. The whole point behind transcendentalism is you want to transcend society and the influences that would take place so that you try to have a better understanding of your inner self, and you're not going to be influenced by the people you see at homecoming or by corrupted Hollywood movie sets, siblings with strange college ideas, the corporate power that is Dunkin' Donuts that will slowly suck all of Bethany's funds away, and she'll just be stuck making pencils the rest of her life, which, hey, there could be some good things from it. But the whole transcendentalist idea is the idea that you're going to kind of become one with yourself. You have a better, authentic understanding of who you are, which makes sense as you start reading this, and he's really wailing away at the government. He would look at the government as being something that is going to have a strong influence on people, and it has much more of an influence than it definitely should. So while he's living outside, and we'll kind of get into what that little experience was like for him, he's outside for about those 2 years. 1849 is when he publishes Civil Disobedience. Would have been published in like a pamphlet form, so it's something that as you were walking around, he could be at the corner of Park Avenue and something passing it out to you as you're walking through Concord, Massachusetts. 1854 is when he publishes Walden, which is a collection of essays and writings from his experiences when he's at Walden Pond. This is definitely his more well-known work, although Civil Disobedience is pretty common. And then 1862, so looks like Abe Lincoln, but while Abe Lincoln would be president in 1862, is when he dies at the age of 44 due to bronchitis. And his last words before he dies, "Now comes good sailing." Dramatic pause, and then he says 2 more words.
Goodbye.
Peace out.
Abort.
That would have been good. But instead he says, "Moose, Indian,"
What?
and dies.
Is it actually?
So when you are on Jeopardy, and there's that double Jeopardy question for Thoreau,
Yeah.
you're going to bet the whole thing, because it's going to ask his 2 last words, and you'll say Moose, Indian. Yep.
Why Moose?
I don't know. He died shortly after. Can't really, ask him about it. He's going North Hills. Come on. Go Indians.
How big was Walden Pond? We're talking literally a small pond or North Park.
Like geographically the size of it? Yeah, North Park would be, I don't know what the actual dimensions would be, but no, you'd be more, you're going to New England. I would say, North Park Lake would be conceivable to it. This would not be, and Emerson's property butts up on the Walden Pond, but Emerson does not own Walden Pond itself. It would not be one of those little fishing holes, that you'll see in people's yards that they'll stock with trout or something like that every spring. So I'd say something pretty similar to North Park. I forget who made it, but a couple of years ago, probably wasn't online. There's a video game, Walden, and you're Thoreau, And
You do.
yeah,
It's like
you
a
just
flash
try to
game.
survive for those 2 years. I did not play.
You do not play it?
I don't know if you use the Moose Indian, if that gives you like a secret code that you unlock whole other
Yeah.
stages, and Mario and Luigi start showing up from time to time. Who knows? When he's at Walden Pond, he starts this in July of 1845. He lives in a cabin on Emerson's property, and as I said, does this 2-year experiment of simple living, leaving behind the rigors, structures, and all that kind of stuff of society. The equivalent of the thing that he's living in would probably be like a shed. In back of my yard, I think my shed's like 12 by 12 or something like that. Big enough to fit in the stuff that I need, and that's pretty much what he has. So if you go to Walden Pond, and you bring back pictures, we'll reward you with 50,000 bonus points. You'll probably be done for the semester, and we'll never see you again. But you could go get your picture taken with the bronze statue of Henry David Thoreau, and you could go check in his little hut cabin type thing here that he was staying in. So it's not that he was camping so far in his tent with a sleeping bag and trying to get his s'mores and marshmallows, but this would be the extent of what the living would be. So you have little kind of stove, little bed over here, more of a cot than anything
It's a
else.
bed.
A couple chairs and a table. Yeah, it's like a cot.
I thought that was like impressive. Couldn't see it.
Just a blue bed, nice little white pillow. So
Sure.
he had heat, he had shelter, but food would be something that he would be responsible for getting, whether it be hunting animals, berries and twigs and all that kind of stuff. I'm thinking his beard was fairly mangled by the time we got past 6 months or so, Maria, so could be a little scary from time to time. But he's still tutoring Emerson's kids, so it's not that he's in complete solitude, isolation for those 2 years. He's still going up to Emerson's house. He's still working with the kids, and he still is going into Concord, Massachusetts. So it's not that he is completely isolated. He'll come into town from time to time. He would go into town more often than like a J.D. Salinger would be. When Salinger would be off writing books and short stories and all that kind of stuff. But chances are, if you're the little kids in town, you probably go, "Ooh, there's that funny little guy, Thoreau that lives out in the woods and all that kind of stuff."
He was so rich and he chose to be poor. Like that kind of bugs me.
I wouldn't. I mean, they make the pencils and all that kind of stuff. He is not leaving behind like lifestyles of the rich and famous, filthy, Rolls Royce equivalents of the 1830s and things like that. The family, for the most part, would be like middle class. So, I mean, he is still leaving behind definitely comforts, of living that, we would certainly enjoy. But he really, hey, it's not processed, it's organic.
I mean, that's true.
His big thing would be, I can't be part of a society that believes in things that I don't, or that would support things that I don't. So, looking back, he would certainly be considered like an abolitionist. He's against slavery. Does slavery exist in Massachusetts in the 1830s and the 1840s? Not really. Does it exist in other parts of the country? Absolutely. You have Civil War taking place. But when he's dying in 1862, the way that states are set up, and you guys and government probably kind of talk about it a little bit, is if it's the 1820s, the 1830s, the states are more separate type entities than they would be today. We don't think of it as a big deal going to Ohio, going to New York, going to Delaware, New Jersey. Hey, we're going to go to Ocean City, we cross through all these state borders, not a big deal. If a Pennsylvanian is showing up in New York, what are you doing here? You are part of the United States, but it's more of kind of independent state-run governments. So the states have to be able to support their people more so than what we think of on a national scale. So if Massachusetts needs textiles, Massachusetts does a lot of manufacturing, especially like up in Boston. Where are they going to get their cotton from?
South.
So you're doing trade, you have import, export, things like that. Thoreau's argument would be, if I'm bringing in cotton from South Carolina, I'm supporting the economy of South Carolina, I'm supporting the government of South Carolina, indirectly I'm supporting the institution of slavery within South Carolina. So that's where the political machine kind of concept for him becomes a big deal. I can't support a nation, I can't support a government that does things that I don't believe to be correct. And this idea of disobedience, when you think of civil disobedience, what comes to mind? Also,
like civil, he's like being like a peaceful protest.
so civil disobedience as opposed to like violent protest.
Yeah.
Or you can also think of civil disobedience as who is being disobedient? The civilian population, the people themselves. And disobedience is something that is within his family kind of a big deal. His grandfather on his mother's side, I find this story hysterical. His father on his mother's side led the first student revolt in the history of Harvard, and as far as we know, the colonies. In 1766, there was the Great Harvard. This would be like 50,000 bonus points. It's known as the Butter Revolt.
What do you do?
Asa Dunbar slammed his butter down, stood up on the table, and said, "Our butter stinketh. I demand," this is quote, "I demand butter that stinketh not." Half the school got expelled because they started this whole student rally and protest behind it.
About butter?
Yeah, it was over butter. Eventually they went, "Yeah, our butter is pretty bad. We need to start, kind of changing the ways," and they let most of the people back in. Hey, this ranch dressing is terrible. Demand a change.
My ranch dressing stinketh.
I demand, you have to go, "I demand ranch dressing that stinketh not," and then you would go with it. So his family is one that,
You should put that at lunch today.
they're kind of the outsiders a little bit so far as if we don't like something, we're going to kind of cause a, no pun intended, stink about it. Whether it be butter or politics or whatnot. So,
I love how they
There
used
you
to
go.
talk back then, like this stinketh not.
stinketh not. Tomorrow, when I pass back the TWAs, these essays stinketh, Sam. I demand an essay that stinketh not. So when he is outside with his Walden Pond experiment is really when he kind of starts focusing on transcendentalism. And it's not that he is the one who creates the idea, but it's something that he kind of is absorbing himself in a little bit more. And this is something that he's trying to experience. Did you guys cover Locke last year with world history a little bit? Not that you would have necessarily been reading, essay concerning human understanding, but at least maybe familiar with John Locke. Locke brings in the idea of sensationalism, that the body is an empty vessel. And so if kind of like, think of it as a blank slate or a blank canvas. And so everything that you come in contact with ends up developing who you are as a person. So the people you meet at school plays a part, whether it be students, teachers, parents play a part, friends play a part, and then also those social influences play a part. Transcendentalism kind of takes the opposite of that you are not an empty vessel, but you already have a soul, you already have an identity, you already have a personal spirit, so to speak. But all those outside forces that Locke is saying creates who you are, a transcendentalist would go, all those outside forces corrupts who you should be. So if you remove yourself from society, if you remove yourself from those social influences, you get a better idea of who you are. So if you were to study philosophy, major in philosophy at the college level, Immanuel Kant would be a person you would kind of take a look at. These ideas of transcendentalism would be something that they would come across. And then you could have your deep thoughts about being unemployed and live outside buying North Park.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do.
With your mainly neck beard 25 years from now.
Yeah,
You can't grow facial.
I will. I'll just go and grow a neck beard, that's it.
Halloween's coming up.
Uh-huh.
You can shave the head, save the hair,
Yeah.
super glue it. I would have more respect for you. It's something to try. Later on in the year, more around like January time, we'll take a look at a novel called Siddhartha that has heavy Hindu, Buddhist influences in it. Transcendentalism really is kind of also looking at Eastern culture, and so a lot of Hindu, Buddhist ideas are thoughts that are kind of blending in with transcendentalism a lot. So this is also pretty controversial in the sense that when you take a look at New England, you have very traditional ways of looking at things, religion, politics, but certainly religion being up there. So these folks in some ways would be looked at as maybe not being necessarily atheists or heretics, but certainly people who would have opposing viewpoints to what you would expect at that time. And this pretty much mentions all the things I was taking a look at, that those outside forces, whether it be religion, politics, or whatnot, kind of take who the person is and corrupt that natural goodness that would exist. So again, it's not that you're a blank slate, that you're an empty vessel that you need to be filled up, but you don't want to really kind of tarnish what's going on. While he's at Walden Pond, so remember this is 1845 to 1847, Thoreau goes into town because he's getting some supplies and things like that. While he is in town in 1846 is when he gets arrested and thrown into jail. And when you are in the middle part of the reading, around page 6 or so, is when he'll really start getting into laws, and he'll be mentioning time in prison and things like that. This is what he's referring back to. So this gets written in 1849, but really the night that he spends in jail in 1846 is where this all kind of begins. One of the things that Thoreau mentions in here multiple times is the idea of he calls it two different things, but it's really the same. There's the highway tax, and he also calls it a poll tax, a P-O-L-L tax. This would be a tax that goes to the state of Massachusetts that he looks as being supportive of slavery, in the sense of Massachusetts would be doing commerce, with southern states that would be dealing with racism, or dealing with slavery. And also this is a tax that would go to be supporting the Mexican-American War, which he is certainly not a fan of at that time either. So he refuses to pay his poll tax. So how is he being civilly disobedient? I'm not going to give the government any money. I'm not going to give a government money if I can't support what that government is going to do with the money. Well, if you don't pay your taxes and you show up in town long enough, at some point they're eventually going to get you. So 1846, he ends up spending the night in jail. The next morning, they go, "You're free." He doesn't pay the tax. No one truly knows who kind of pays his bail, but the assumption is that his aunt, actually it'd be New England, so we can say aunt, his aunt would come in and actually lets him out so that the family doesn't, kind of get disgraced by him.
So he wrote like this, like a huge, long thing on wanting to be civilly disobedient, and like he spent, in like his time in prison, he spent a night there. He spent like less than 24 hours in prison, and that's like a big part of this.
That would be the impetus, the starting point for him, pretty much, yeah.
That's hilarious. The dude,
How many nights have you spent in prison?
like 0, but I wouldn't, you think like Nelson Mandela and like people like that, and this dude spent a night in prison, and he's like ever changed by that.
So when we take a look at a letter from Birmingham jail, which is Kane writing a letter from Birmingham jail, and he's in jail for about a week, yeah, he would have,
A transcendent
more than
experience.
7 times the amount, but essentially 7 times for that week, the time spent in jail that Thoreau does. And Thoreau, I wouldn't say Thoreau is at the mountaintops yelling and screaming and beating his chest. Look at me, I went to jail, I did it, I stuck it to the man.
Dan paid the bill. He didn't do it.
Hey, if they open the door and they say you can walk out,
Also 6 years.
I'm walking out.
of not paying taxes, and he's only in there for a night.
Well, if the tax bill gets paid,
Huh.
you're good to go. So, Ann comes in, cuts the check, or whomever, and all right, the bill is done, and that's it. Now, does Thoreau start dutifully paying his taxes from that point on? No, he still pretty much refuses to pay them, but it becomes more of a nuisance to deal with him and bring him into town than anything else. So, throughout I'd say that the night in jail is certainly the starting point, and is certainly the thing that kind of gets civil disobedience running. I would not say that for 16 pages he's bragging about him spending a night in jail. His main argument, and he starts off, that government is best which governs least. He would certainly be a person who thinks that you should not have to be controlled by the government. In technical terms, you could argue, and I think this would be overstating it a little bit, but you could argue that Thoreau is an anarchist. Because he would go, that government is best which governs least, and then he goes, well, I hardly accept the motto, that government is best which governs not at all. And so if the government's not going to govern at all, you essentially could have all chaos on the streets. He would not be one in favor of big government. He wouldn't be one in favor of government spending, government programs, things like that. Each person should be responsible for him or herself. The government would be here to protect me should some kind of external force come in, like War of 1812. But the government shouldn't be something that should be trying to annex Texas, take over California, things like that from other people, because if that's not something that I support, why should they be out there trying to do it? But yeah, he has his, 7 hours, 8 hours, whatever the case would be, spending in jail. So Civil Disobedience is coming 3 years later, written in 1849, motivated during that night in jail, and essentially his disgust with what's happening with slavery, Mexican-American War, those are really the things that are bothering him more so than anyone else. He would be a person that you could argue, though, Ben, and certainly politics, folks will always kind of bicker about and complain. If you were to say to him, well, what are you going to do about it? I'm not going to support it. I'm not going to pay my taxes. Are you willing to face the consequences? Yeah, he did. But no, he's not someone that would be looking to assassinate a president. He's not someone who's going to try to, I would say, start his own butter revolution. The government stinketh. I demand a government that stinketh not. But he's certainly going to do what he feels is best and what he feels is right by him. He's not going to worry about what the ramifications would be from other folks, because he's certainly only worried about himself. You mentioning King. King has a lot of positive things to say about Thoreau, and reading it, and so does Gandhi. So deeply moved that we reread the work Civil Disobedience several times. No other person has been more eloquent and passionate in getting this idea across than Henry David Thoreau. As a result of his writings and personal witness, we are heirs of a legacy of creative protest, and Gandhi has a similar, kind of response to it. So say what you will about him, but if I have King and Gandhi in my corner going, you know what, this guy has some pretty good ideas, all right, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt with their ethos and credibility, that there's probably something to it. I would say probably around page 7 or 8, you have to take a little bit of a break. I would, if you haven't started, I would start tonight. Doing the whole thing tomorrow is probably going to be a little cumbersome, to kind of work through. He does get repetitive, and he will try to reinforce points. Think of this as more, not a formal essay. I don't like saying political propaganda, but it's meant to be a pamphlet where, he certainly kind of goes on a little bit of a political rant from time to time. But you can at least kind of understand where he's coming from. Slavery, Mexican-American War are really the two things that disgust him more than anything about what would be happening with the American government. Tomorrow, we're going to take a look at this essay, so it's going to be something kind of brand new for us to take a look at, and then Thursday is when we'll be doing the quiz for
Who would even publish?
Demand Good Butter.
Self-published.
Next time you're at Lunch Fellows and you think the butter's not quite right,
I was sad when I saw this last time I was there.
Sam, that was really funny.
They gave some orders. We asked for 2 buffalo chicken pizzas, and the lady brought over a regular pizza, and she went, "Oh, I don't know how to fix this," and then she just left it there.
I would be pretty upset.
Yeah, so Sam went and talked to them, and then it caused this giant chaos in the kitchen.
My friend got
I used to teach the head cook's daughters.
Really?
She would bring me a quarter branch dressing every couple of months. It was always the best time of